Welcome back, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, to Patch.Work.Podfics. This will be a reading of the one-shot titled Everyone Snaps at Some Point by PruneyWitch. This fic is rated for teen and up audiences and has no archive warnings. Here's the summary. There is a quirkless villain on the loose, and there are a lot of mixed reactions on him. Aizawa decides to get his class's opinion on it, and some surprising views come to light, especially from a certain problem student of his. This story has trigger warnings for past bullying, suicide mentions, crying, and mentions of nausea. There is a quirkless villain running around Japan. He calls himself Quirkless, wow, the creativity, and he's quite the character. Everyone reaches their breaking point, and this guy reached his. He just happened to have a bigger reaction to it than most. There are a lot of people who weren't exactly worried about him. He's quirkless. What can he do? They claim the quirkless are unable to do anything, let alone be a successful villain. They thought he'd be reprimanded in no time, until he began to prove them wrong. Quirkless evades the press and heroes many times, and the public and police are shocked. Some of the fights that this guy has and things he does have a good percentage of the public believing that he's lying about his quirklessness. Soon a video goes around, one from Quirkless himself. It was a public statement saying that just because he's doing things that most people can't, doesn't mean he isn't quirkless, it just means that he isn't useless. In the video, he shows images of an x-ray done on his feet showing an extra toe joint, something only found in quirkless people. He also showed his ID, no information blocked out, and next to his quirk, there was a red X, proving his quirklessness. Sure, there were still people claiming that he isn't quirkless, but the video quelled most of the people that didn't believe him. It was also a power move. His address, birth name, age, birthday, basically all of his information was written on his ID. It was as if to say, come and get me. It was a challenge, and seeing as he hadn't been caught yet, it was a challenge he was winning. His popularity stirred up a lot of talk about the quirkless, and it revealed how little faith everyone has in the quirkless. It results in a lot more studies being done, statistics being renewed, information being revised and discovered. It began a new wave of recognition of the quirkless. A couple days after the video came out, the hype died down, and people stopped talking about it. It was exactly what Quirkless didn't want. He wanted action, but the only way for that is for people to keep talking about his message. So he did what he saw fit. He hacked every TV channel and put up a photo of his x-rays. He left it up there for about an hour before he took it down. He just wanted to remind people that he was still there, that he was just starting. He upped his game after that. Quirkless wouldn't let this be skipped over. He was going to make a statement, and no one was going to stop him. He would get the people on his side, and there would be change. Quirkless began to steal goods, lots of them. He'd empty out entire stores, and soon their contents would end up completely intact on the doorstep of the nearest police station. There was always a note in a very fancy handwriting proving that it was the work of Quirkless. Quirkless gained a large fan following, even though he's a villain. It proved that beliefs are stronger than ethics for some. His message was something that many people believed in and wanted to help spread. He worked hard to gain his platform, starting off with real damaging crime before moving on to less harmful things. Quirkless made sure to let it be known that he meant to harm by his actions, but he was simply trying to get his name out there, to create a sort of platform where he could be sure that people would listen to him. Once he did, he stopped with trying to become popular, and began spreading his message, though he had a unique way of doing it. Quirkless broke into several extremely secure places: bank vaults, museums, important exhibits, galleries. He always either took something or made sure that people knew he was there. The thing was, every time he went on one of these escapades, he was able to avoid any sort of camera, security guard, hero, and policeman. One time, he doodled with an expo marker all over the glass case of one of the most precious items in an exhibit dedicated to All Might. Typically, the most someone would get for that is a large fine or a couple weeks' custody, but for this specific case, protecting the very Bronze Age costume of All Might, the punishment would be much worse. Only if he was caught, of course. It was strange that he hadn't been caught doing that, seeing as there were several sensors and lasers protecting the case. The alarms will go off if someone crosses the velvet rope protecting a glass case or even reaches a finger over it, but for some reason Quirkless was able to draw all over it. It would be impressive to the staff working there if they didn't have to go through the hassle of cleaning it all up. No, scratch that, it was impressive nonetheless. In fact, the workers gained a lot more respect for him as they realized how hard cleaning the case would be without turning off the security system. Other quirked and quirkless people underestimate him and his skill. They try to copy his crime, thinking it's simpler than it looks. It always ends in them being captured and arrested because of their inadequacy. It's strange because somehow A villain is helping to level and lower the crime rate, though it isn't by much. Aren't villains supposed to do the opposite? Is he a villain at all? People ask why he didn't just make a platform a different way if all he wanted was to be listened to. It was a frequently asked question when it came to him. It was asked frequently enough to warrant an answer. There was a video posted by Quirkless, face shown and all. It posed his answer to everyone that was asking why he turned to villainy. Many have asked why he became a villain to spread my message rather than spreading it like others that wish for change. And simply my answer is this: more people are listening. Say I were to make a page on social media advertising Quirkless rights. Would you click on it? Investigate it? Listen? Understand? Chances are you wouldn't. Even if you do believe in equal rights and treatment for the Quirkless, I doubt you'd click on a page dedicated to it. In fact, I can say that you wouldn't ever pay attention to it. And do you want to know how I know? He paused for effect. Because I made one, he continued. Not one follower, and not one comment or like. I updated regularly and topically, and yet not a single thing. You can check it out for yourselves if you'd like. The @ is literally @QuirklessInfo if you wanted to check it out. I still upload if you're wondering, and now that this is out in the world, I hope you'll finally start to pay attention. There is a great injustice going on in the world, and I won't stand for it, even if it means turning to villainy. This is how I'm spreading it, like it or not. And it's working, right? You're listening right now, aren't you? And with that, the video cut off. That video was the last straw for Aizawa. He had been meaning to talk about quirklessness with literally anyone, so who better to talk to than his own heroic students? Whether they like it or not, he was going to make a lesson of it. Aizawa was pretty sure that they would like it, though, since for the past couple of weeks he picked up a couple of conversations about it. During today's homeroom, he could hear bustling about the video. He heard it being played, he heard people talking about it. It was practically all anyone in class was speaking about, if they were speaking at all. I'm looking at you, Koda. Aizawa was almost shivering from excitement in his sleeping bag as he heard Ida tell the class that there were 5 more minutes until homeroom ended and class started. Aizawa couldn't wait to start the lesson, but he took a breath to calm himself down before unzipping his sleeping bag. He had an image to maintain, after all. As he stood, he prepared himself for the lesson to come. He turned to grab the chalk and wrote down 3 categories on the board: bad morals and bad actions, good morals and bad action, and good morals and good action. Aizawa could tell that his class was confused, but they would find out in a little what those were for. "Good morning, class," he drawled, receiving a mirrored greeting from the class. "Today we'll be covering a topic you all are fairly familiar with. It'll be a mediated discussion about the current villain Quirkless," Aizawa revealed. The class started going crazy. Mina was smiling and bouncing a little in her seat, excited that there was going to be a class on a topic that she knew about for once. Something similar was happening with Sero. Ojiro smiled a little at the prospect of already understanding what they were going to be covering. Yayorozu frowned a little. Everyone was talking about it, and now it was a class lesson? She couldn't help but be a little sick of it, but she respected Aizawa enough not to complain. With a glare, Aizawa shut the class up and made them shudder under his stare. He smirked to himself, knowing that he still had it. "I know you're all aware about the villain Quirkless and that he stands for Quirkless rights. I will be asking you what your opinions are on him. They must fit into one of these categories. You're either for or against his message." He almost frowned at that. His message was a good one. Plus, technically, this is a debate where you're supposed to express your opinions, and he's allowed to have a bias. He'd try to be neutral, but he'd see how far that would get him first. And for or against his actions, but you cannot be against his message and for his actions, because then you're just supporting crime. He got a couple smiles for that one. Being constantly deadpan had his perks. For one, it made his rare jokes just a little funnier. "So," Aizawa began, "who absolutely despises him? Message and all." He hoped he didn't get a large show of hands for this one. He was trying to raise a class of heroes. He couldn't have them thinking, not everyone deserves rights. And sadly, there were hands raised, but not a lot, namely from Sato, Yayorozu, Todoroki, and Kaminari. "Yayorozu, can you explain your decision?" he said, keeping his face neutral despite the overwhelming disappointment he felt. She was one of the brightest in the class. It was sad to see that her morals didn't include everyone. "Well, I just don't think that anything needs to change in our society, so there's no need for him or his senseless crime. I understand that the Quirkless aren't fully given their equal rights." Aizawa almost snorted at that. "But they're less evolved, correct? So they'll go extinct soon, right? Why make rules for a dying breed?" Yayorozu finished, almost proud of herself. Aizawa was disgusted. She practically spoke of Quirkless people like they weren't human. He's aware she may not have meant to say that, or maybe she just didn't fully understand the weight of what she had said. But it was wrong nonetheless, and Aizawa was peeved, so he did something petty. "Ah," was all Aizawa said in response to her. It didn't reveal if he was for or against her, or if he agreed or disagreed. It was just a simple acknowledgement. He knew that would drive her crazy. Yagirozu thrives off of criticism. She loves knowing that what she's doing is right or wrong, that she's on some track. She likes constant approval, but also likes knowing what she can fix as well. It gives her a path to follow on. But leaving her in the air like this, it's the worst thing you can do to her, especially after she so proudly stated her opinion. Plus, he knew it would only feel far worse for her after everyone else stated their stance, since they'd all be different from hers, and she'd feel left out and incorrect. She absolutely was incorrect, but she didn't feel it. Not yet. Aizawa saw the smile slowly slip off her face, and he was filled with as much satisfaction as you can get from such a petty act. He knew he probably shouldn't be mean to children, but he's literally almost died for them. He's allowed to be petty once in a while. Aizawa turned, looking away from where he was previously. "Now, raise your hand if you are for his message, but you don't like the way he's going about it," he lazily drawled out, though he was pretty far from tired, even though as soon as this class was over, he'd probably be taking a nap. Most of the class raised their hands, practically all of them, really. Kirishima, Tsuyu, Shoji, and Hagakure's sleeve went up, and it was understandable for a class of heroes to be for rights but against crime. "Raise your hand if you're for his actions and you approve of how he's publicizing himself," Aizawa said, looking around the room for hands, and was pleasantly surprised when he saw a hand raised by a green-haired boy. He hummed an acknowledgement, though it was drowned out with the gasps of shock and a call of, "What revelry in the dark," as the others in the class saw it as well. "Todoroki, please explain your stance," Aizawa said, pulling everyone's attention back from Midoriya. "I feel that it doesn't matter what anyone stands for, or if you're a hero, ouch, my heart, or a villain. Breaking the law is breaking the law, and it shouldn't go unpunished. Not all heroes are good, and not all villains are bad. But I refuse to listen to someone who breaks the law," Todoroki said, just a tad bit of hate showing on his face as he explained. If anyone was watching, they would have seen Midoriya wince at his words. It doesn't matter what he stands for if how he goes about sharing his thoughts isn't lawful. The law exists for a reason, and by breaking it, there's a large majority chance that he is hurting somebody, like the profits of the stores he steals from, or the museum he vandalizes, because people think the security there is weak, or they're afraid. I also don't appreciate how he always leaves a mess wherever he goes," Todoroki said, and if Aizawa didn't know any better, he'd say there was a frown forming on Todoroki's face. But now that he was looking closely, no, Todoroki's face was as blank as usual. "I understand where you're coming from, but I would like to inform you that the stores he steals from are doing much better than they were before due to increased publicity. He's saved a few small businesses with his work," Aizawa said, letting people know that there had been a positive influence on the world because of Quirkless. Aizawa decided to move on to questioning the next category of people. "Aoyama, please explain your decision." Aoyama's sparkles under the light only seemed to grow as he was called on, unashamed to be in the spotlight. "Oui. The way he goes about spreading his message isn't very fashionable, but the message he is trying to get out is very sparkly. J'adore that he was standing for what is right, but je n'aime pas how he does it. La façon de s'envalit, je n'aime pas..." Intelligible French sounds, Aoyama says with a flourish of his hands. Translation, "I don't like how he does it, it isn't very fashionable." Tokoyami raises his hand after that, and Aizawa calls on him. "Tokoyami?" "I agree with Aoyama. I don't like how he handles things, but I do have to admit that it is effective," Tokoyami said. "How do you mean?" Aizawa asks. "He changed my opinion on the Quirkless. Before, I barely gave the Quirkless a passing thought. When I did find them crossing my mind, I found myself thinking with words like weak and frail. Because of Quirkless's spread of awareness and unabashed call-outs to similar thinking patterns, I realized I was ultimately calling them useless without really using the word useless. Because of what he does, he allowed me to see that people who are Quirkless have just as much potential. It was a flawed way of thinking, and I'm glad I don't think that way anymore. I don't know why I didn't realize how wrong I was sooner," Tokoyami said, hands unfolding from the cross position into dramatic gestures and poses. Aizawa was glad that Tokoyami's views changed, and he was also glad that Tokoyami was brave enough to admit that they were ever different. By setting a precedent, others can follow with less fear. "But even though he changed my views with his crime, I cannot say that I condone his actions. I understand that crime is the platform he chose for a reason, and I cannot say I ever saw crime as a platform. I just hope that other criminals don't follow suit and use crime as a way to promote their thinking. I do feel that it could become a sort of terrorism. The only reason that Quirkless isn't technically a terrorist is because what he does isn't harmful and doesn't invoke fear. It rather sparks knowledge, and for that reason I support him. but not what he does, though I am on the edge of saying that I support him fully, Tokoyami finished, arms settling back to their crossed position. Mina chimed in. Yeah, me too. Well, maybe not about the almost supporting him thing, because it felt wrong to support a villain, but the way he literally isn't afraid to be arrested is kind of worrying. But anyways, he totally changed the way I saw quirkless people. It's, like, crazy. Because before, I saw them as, like, people to feel super bad for, because they don't have quirks, which is crazy. No quirk? And I thought that meant that they can't do anything. And then he said something like, you are more than your quirk, or something like that. Oh, no, wait. It was, you are able to do things outside of the abilities your quirk gives you, or something like that. So, yeah, when he said that, I was like, whoa, and it totally changed everything for me. She sat back down, not even realizing that she stood up in the first place. Aizawa nodded, taking in the information. So both Tokoyami and Mina had been won over by this guy. Was he really so influential? Aizawa had always been on the side of quirkless rights. How could he not be when he found such a large amount of them on high ledges and roofs? Aizawa knew that as an underground hero, he'd have to stop a lot of suicides, but he didn't like that he's found more quirkless people than quirked, no matter how mathematically impossible that is because of the higher population of quirked people in Japan. He didn't like finding anyone at all, but when there was a consistent pattern of quirkless suicide attempts, he didn't think he'd be able to ignore the fact that they're so discriminated against. Especially when he finds a kid on the ledge, because the younger generations are the most discriminated against. And also because he has such a soft spot for kids. It hurt even more when he knew he couldn't save them. Aizawa knows that other heroes also found people on the verge of suicide, and given how likely it is, he knows that few people in this classroom that aren't becoming an underground hero will come across a person on the edge of suicide. It is important that they believe in equal rights for the quirkless, because if the person they find just happens to be, he will not want to have a say that one of the kids he brought up let someone die because of their quirk status. Ida raised his hand. Yes, Ida? You'd like to share? Aizawa drawled tiredly, but internally he was excited. He thought that Ida would be with Yaoyorozu and Todoroki, so seeing that he wasn't was a pleasant surprise. Yes, Sensei, I as well have been persuaded by his influence. Quirkless has shown me that a quirk is merely an enhancement of a certain abilities, or an ability in itself. It is an addition rather than a whole, Ida said, chopping his hand at the end of every statement. He proved to me the truth of the saying, a jack of all trades, master of none is better than a master of one, or in other words, one-trick ponies. I can attest to those words as well. Before this year, I hadn't even thought to throw a punch. Why would I if my legs were the tools that my quirk enhanced? But just because my arms weren't enhanced didn't mean they aren't useful. I thought my legs were all I needed, but during training, Midoriya helped me to see that by using all of my limbs, I can reach a higher strength. It should have been common sense, but I was blinded by my quirk. After realizing my problem and fixing it, I was able to improve my fighting style, Ida finished, relaxing his arm to sit on his desk. Though they were still flexed and pointed forwards, how in the world does he not cramp up? Very well, Ida, but you don't support how he does things, Aizawa asked. Not at all, sir. I understand approving his message, but to support his crime, even as his way of spreading awareness, doesn't feel heroic, Ida said, hands chopping once again. And you, Ashido? Aizawa turned to her. Nope, I agree with Ida. I get what he's trying to do with the whole villain thing or whatever, but I just don't like his crime. I love what he's trying to do, and I love how successful he is at it, but I do think that if he's ever caught, he should go to jail. Not because I hate him or anything, but just because you have to face the law after you break it, you know? Mina said, hair bouncing as she spoke. I see, Aizawa said, deadpan as always. He turned to Midoriya. It was always the problem child, wasn't it? Midoriya, explain your views. You said you support his views and his actions, Aizawa said, and out of the corner of his eye he saw the rest of the class perk up. He knew they were as excited to hear what he had to say, and, to be honest, he was as well. Yes, Sensei, Midoriya started. Determination that's usually reserved for battle or serious analysis was painted on his face. I don't think he's all that bad. That drew out a gasp from Yaoyorozu. I just think he needed to make a statement, and this was the way he saw best to do it. It worked, didn't it? Some of you guys were convinced, weren't you? Midoriya looked around the room, locking eyes with the people who confessed to switching sides. Sure, I wouldn't support another villain doing this for other reasons, but I'm not going to generalize my opinions of crime as a platform. I don't feel that it can be. Sure, it's morally wrong to steal, but how do you think museums got their art? Since this is such a sensitive and specific topic, I just don't think it can be generalized to an entire category of issue. Yeah, if someone did this to support something more subjective, then I wouldn't accept it. But equal rights aren't negotiable or an option. They aren't politics. No one should be discriminated against, especially on the basis of law. You can't just deny someone equal treatment. Midoriya was very, very passionate about this, and with good reason. A lot of the class had seen Midoriya passionate, but not like this. It was almost like he was angry, and they think that maybe he was. They also think that with every word Midoriya speaks, the more justified his anger is. They were angry as well. Midoriya really did say it clearly. These were human rights, not something to be denied or toyed with. Where did they get off treating this like anything else? So, an established objective issue, this is something unprecedented. You could compare him to Stain, but there is a key difference. Stain was pitching ideals, but Quirkless is spreading awareness and asking for a change, Midoriya said, gesturing wildly as he ranted. It's clear that he thought a lot on the topic. Ida stiffened at the mention of Stain. He had been comparing Quirkless to Stain, but he decided to side with Quirkless anyway. His own personal experience shouldn't get in the way of what was right, and he recognized that. Midoriya was only reinforcing what he believed. Quirkless is convincing rather than forcing. What he's doing is wild and kinda impressive, but it isn't harsh. He's never done any real harm, and like Sensei said earlier, he's actually helped people. He's never killed or even injured anyone, and to be honest, that's more than you can say for most heroes. And where do we get off calling people heroes when they've hurt more people than someone we're labeling a villain? Midoriya says, and he sees Sero light up with realization at that. His jaw dropped open and his back stiffened. Sero's eyes widened as he stared at Midoriya, and at that moment, Midoriya realized he had just won Sero over. He realized that his words are being processed by the class. They have weight. He can help convince his class. Even if just a couple people, it's still a change that the world needs, especially from a class of upcoming heroes. To refute Todoroki's point, he turns directly to address Todoroki, who looks a little betrayed. Lawfulness doesn't equate to goodness. There was a period in America where slavery was legal, but that didn't make it good. It's bad, and it's always been bad. Sure, over time the law has become a lot more fair, and the ratio between goodness and lawfulness has become a lot more accurate. The gap between the two is lessened, which is great, because what is the law if not to keep the people under it good? But the illegality of what Quirkless is doing doesn't disprove the correctness or inherent goodness of his stance, Midoriya said, never once looking away from the bicolored male. Todoroki looked like he wanted to give in, but something was holding him back. He just had to push a little harder. There's so many heroes that do less than honorable things, so it shouldn't be so hard to believe in a villain with real, noble causes. Heroes aren't above the law, and neither is Quirkless. But if someone is doing bad things that contribute to a good cause, then I'll take it. Midoriya's eyes were pleading with Todoroki. Quirkless should be listened to. Sure, his actions are less than savory, but this is a moment when the bigger picture is more important. Plus, ignoring him and his goal and focusing solely on the actions would only make him continue, no? He said it himself. He isn't going to stop until he's listened to. It's clear he has the skills to keep going until then. Seeing him at his current face value isn't going to do anything. To get him to stop, you have to listen to what he's saying, not just what he's doing. He's fighting for justice. His ways are questionable, but ultimately, I can't think of anything more noble, Midoriya finished, glad to see Todoroki's eyes shine with newfound understanding. And so, what do you think about him? Forget about his crime for a moment and focus on Quirkless himself. What do you think about him? Aizawa said, smirking slightly. He knew it was a weird and strangely direct question to ask, but Aizawa knew that Midoriya would understand. Well, I don't think he's a villain. Several pairs of eyebrows raised in shock. Not just because I like him, or because we share ideals, don't get me wrong, he absolutely breaks the law and does things that he should be arrested for. He himself knows that. But I don't think that just breaking the law makes you a villain. What did he do to be called a villain? People slapped a label on him as soon as they disagreed with him. He broke the law, and people saw what he stood for and called him a villain. But is that really the basis for it? Breaking the law? Midoriya looked at Aizawa, genuinely curious. But Aizawa just looked at him with eyes that nudged him to go further. Like he already knew the answer. Like he was getting there. Trespassing doesn't make you a villain, it makes you a criminal. Mass murder probably makes you a villain and a criminal. Is it the severity of the crime? No, I'd say there are pretty severe things you could do that would get people to see you as a villain, but technically you wouldn't be one, like pedophilia. It's illegal, and people would most likely see you as both a criminal and a villain, but in reality you wouldn't be a villain, just a criminal. Unless pedophilia wasn't your only crime and you did something that would... That was the last line Midoriya got out before dissolving deep into mutters and mumbles. Midoriya put his hand on his chin and brought his eyebrows together like he usually does when he's thinking way too hard, until his head snapped up and he looked at Aizawa, who stared down at the kid. Midoriya's eyes was slightly open as he reeled from the realization of what separates criminals and villains. "So, kid?" Aizawa asked, barely holding himself together. "Quirk use," Midoriya says softly, looking like he just saw all the answers to the universe. Aizawa's face began to morph into a brilliant grin, and Midoriya knew he was right. He repeated it louder this time. "It's quirk use!" Midoriya looked around the room to find someone just as excited as him, but it was just him and Aizawa, who shared genius. "Quirkless can't be a villain, because he has no quirk to use," Midoriya said, scoffing out a disbelieving laugh as he put his hand to his forehead before slumping backwards in his chair. Uraraka piped up. "So, you think he's a hero?" "No, not quite. Because he's still doing crime, motive doesn't make you a hero. But that is closer," Midoriya answered. "Due to his influence, a lot of awareness has been spread for the quirkless. Scientists have done new studies on them, which helps a lot because some diseases only affect quirkless people differently because they're less evolved. They've also refreshed a lot of statistics on them. They stopped taking the quirkless census a couple years ago, but they started again, and I think it's cool there's an actual good change to come out of this." Midoriya took a second to stop talking and just smile at the better state of the world. Not one person in the classroom could stop a smile from growing on their face at that. They were happy that the world was improving, plus, Midoriya smiled like sunshine. Even Bakugo and Todoroki had genuine smiles on their face, however small they were. That was until Jiro spoke up. "Wait, they stopped taking the quirkless census?" Midoriya snapped out of his warm feeling. "Yeah, it was 10 years or so ago. They just stopped considering them. Quirkless people could fill them out, yeah, but that doesn't mean they were going to be taken into account. You can't lie on those forms, and once they see that you're quirkless, they basically just scrap them." "But why didn't we know about it?" Jiro asked, with a sinking suspicion that she already knew the answer. "They don't broadcast a lot of news on the quirkless. Or, well, they didn't. Now it's much different, because all you hear about the quirkless were occasional suicides, and that's it. With the emergence of Quirkless, a ton of stuff is coming to light as he shares what it's like to live quirkless, and the news is all over it," Midoriya said, subtly covering the fact that he knew most of the knowledge from experience and deep nights scouring the web for safe forums where quirkless people could share their experiences. Those were hard to find without the threat of being doxxed. But with the newly done stats, we can see that since Quirkless's emergence, the bullying and suicide rates for the Quirkless have gone way down. And it isn't just a small improvement, it's a serious change. He's really making history here. Plus, along with that, he's helping with criminal capture, but it doesn't seem like it since all you hear on the news is the newest thing that Quirkless has done, Midoriya said, switching topics. "Police activity has heightened to try and catch Quirkless, but they never do, and that doesn't mean that they don't apprehend anyone. Due to the increased amount of patrolling heroes and cops, the cities are a lot safer than they've been before," Midoriya says, eyes glimmering as he thought about hero work. What a nerd. So, due to his work, he isn't directly saving lives, but he has halted a lot of potentially dangerous people and things. He could be called a hero, but he isn't one in the traditional sense. Anyone can be a hero to anyone else, but normally he'd need a license. "So, a vigilante then?" Kirishima asked. "Well, sort of. I think the best thing to call him is an activist. While he doesn't quite campaign in a conventional way, he does work hard and successfully to get his point and beliefs across. He has been asking for a change in the world, and it's been working," Midoriya said, finally getting to the point. "No one would listen to him if he didn't do what he was doing. Quirkless said it himself. If he asked for equality in a way that is or was customary, then he'd never get anyone's attention. So he's doing it differently. He's forcing people to look at him. And we all know it's working because I know a lot of people that are sick of talking about him," he said, pointedly looking at Bakugo. "He's grabbing people's attention in the way that he thought was best, and I, for one, agree with him," Midoriya finally finished. At this point, the author notes that they know that they're the one who wrote all of this dialogue, but wow, Midoriya talks a lot. The class is left in a state of shock. That is, until Aizawa breaks it. Impressive, I agree. He knows he shouldn't reveal his opinion, but he really didn't care for average teaching methods. That justifies what he does, but why he's doing it is a completely different topic, Aizawa says. Midoriya mentioned the Quirkless statistics, which I doubt you all have memorized. I think you all have a good idea of what they may be like now, but in past years, they've been anything but positive. Quirkless is doing what he does for a reason, and I will be giving you an idea of what that is. I couldn't possibly give you a genuine, 100% true reason because I'm not quirkless, and I could never realistically show you what it would be like to live without a quirk. but I can show you these facts. With that, he turns off the lights and turns on the projector. On the screen is a study done on the Quirkless and the statistics. They're pretty horrifying as compared to the lives that most of these kids have led, with a few exceptions. Mina broached again. This is before Quirkless? That's awful. I can't believe it. She received multiple horrified agreements from the rest of the class, but Midoriya just looked down at his desk. He didn't want to see them. Aizawa spoke again, voice drawling with a hint of sadness. No, Ashido. This is after Quirkless. It's from about 3 weeks ago. Outrage. The class was yelling about injustice and similar topics. Ito was chopping so furiously that Aizawa was sure he would leave a dent in his desk. Uraraka looked like she had just overused her quirk, and so did Aoyama. Yaoyorozu looked shocked beyond words, and Kodo was on the verge of tears. Bakugo was staring blankly at the screen, usual scowl gone, with a vague look of horrification deep in his eyes. Aizawa hushed them up with a glare. It was nice to know that he could shut them up even without his quirk. He let them stew in their silence until someone spoke up. Can we see before? Everyone's head swiveled around with shocked expressions to stare at Bakugo. They'd never heard his voice sound like that before. He'd never sounded so hollow. Are you sure, Bakugo? Aizawa asked, extremely hesitant to show the class the stats from before the emergence of Quirkless. Yeah, Bakugo said, voice flat. No sass, no anger, nothing. Just the affirmation. Aizawa slowly moved to change the image on the screen, leaving plenty of time for someone to object and stop him. You all really want to see them? Aizawa asked, unsure if they really wanted to. The class wasn't sure either. They had a pretty bad reaction to the first set, so why wouldn't it be worse with some new stats? They had saw the reason to say no, someone should object. But no one did. They all found themselves nodding and prompting Aizawa to switch the image to the older data. Gasps of shock rang around the class as they took in the numbers from barely even 7 years ago. 20% of the entire world's population is born quirkless, but a lot of the quirkless people that are born don't live very long, either due to discriminatory doctors, abusive families or friends, hate crimes, or themselves. Don't pity them because every quirkless person that you meet that's still alive is extremely strong, Aizawa said, staring at every student in his class. Tears were freely streaming down several faces. Yaoyorozu's hands were clasped over her mouth. Todoroki's eyes were wide. Tsuyu's eyebrows were lifted. Shoji's arm-mouth-hand thing was hanging open. Bakugo's face was even more blank than before. Midoriya's eyes were glassy as he stared at his desk, so Aizawa gave them some time to recover. After a couple of moments of people wiping their eyes and pulling themselves together, Aizawa spoke again. So yes, I would in fact consider what Quirkless does as activism. He has proper cause, and he takes the measures he sees fit to make sure change is achieved and awareness is spread. No matter who or where you are, there's gonna be opposition. Nothing is going to change that. But I do think it's admirable for Quirkless to continue to stay so strong, despite the large amount of people against him. I'm not saying you should take after him, but I do think that he should be somewhat of a role model for all of you in terms of determination, Aizawa said, a stony look ever present on his face. I'd go so far as to say what he does is harmless. He isn't causing any damage or hurting anyone. In fact, we've already established that he is beneficial in many ways. His crimes don't hurt anyone, but rather just prove a point. I doubt he'll stop until he's listened to, Aizawa says, beginning to wrap up the class as he glances at the clock to see that there are only a few minutes left of class. So, once again, raise your hand if you are against his morals and his actions, Aizawa says, finishing the class with the same vote he took at the start. He just wanted to know if the discussion had affected any opinions. He was glad to see that no one raised their hand. Raise your hand if you support his morals, but not his actions. A few kids raised their hands, but it was only about 4 kids. And if you fully support him? Aizawa asked. His eyes widened at the sheer enthusiasm for which these hands went up. Almost everyone in the class had a proudly raised hand and a smile on their face. He had to hide a smile of his own at his capture weapon. He was so proud of his kids. It looks like Midoriya won you guys over, Aizawa said, wiping the smile off his face. Oh no, his poor reputation. We only have a few minutes left of class, so I'll let you do whatever you want until the bell rings. The class cheered, but once they thought he was done, he said, Oh, Midoriya, see me after class. There were a few oohs and someone's in trouble, but that was to be expected. They did that every time anyone was called to the office or specifically asked to be seen by a teacher. Soon the class ended and people began filing out until it was just 3. Todoroki walked up to Midoriya and pulled him aside, which made no sense since no one else was in the class, and took a stance he did very similar to the one he had before the sports festival. "Midoriya," Todoroki began. "Yes, Todoroki?" Midoriya asked, a little concerned. He didn't say anything for a couple of seconds, but he finally looked up and met Midoriya's eyes. "Are you a Quirkless's secret apprentice or something?" he asked. "Todoroki. Oh my god," Midoriya said, scoffing exasperatedly, but fondly. He began pushing Todoroki out of the classroom. "That wasn't a denial," Todoroki stated, as he tried to grab his bag as he was forced out of the room. "OMG," Midoriya repeated. "That still isn't a no," Todoroki said, cracking a slight smile, which on Todoroki was a brilliant grin. No, I'm not his secret apprentice. Now, shoo, get out," Midoriya said, laughing at his friend's antics. Once Todoroki was gone behind a closed door, he sighed and slumped, before hearing a soft snort, and immediately stiffening. Midoriya had forgotten that Aizawa was in the room with him. He turned stiffly where Aizawa was standing and laughing at him. He blushed and sent a look toward Aizawa that asked why he was there. Aizawa sobers and straightened himself up. "I just wanted to tell you that you did good today, kid. I'm glad you can see what's right from wrong and fight for what you believe in. A lot of heroes are too scared to say what they really think because they don't want people to disagree with them or lose their faith in them. They're afraid of losing their popularity or ranking instead of doing what's right. I'm glad you stuck with your opinion and defended it. That's an important trait for heroes to have if they want real change." "Good on you, kid," Aizawa said, pride in his eyes as he regarded Midoriya. He probably should have expected the instant tears that followed his words. "Thank you, Aizawa-sensei." "No problem, kid. Now, shoo, I want to head to the teacher's lounge if I want to get to the coffee while it's still hot," Aizawa said, turning back to his desk to grab his things. Midoriya turned, picked up his bag, and walked out the door with an upbeat, "Bye, Aizawa-sensei," a pep in his step, and a more confident stance that he had when he walked in that day. Aizawa waited a couple seconds, and then stood in the doorway and watched Midoriya as he walked down the hall with a warm feeling in his heart. The world wasn't ready for the enigma of a hero that is Midoriya Izuku. And that's the end of Everyone Snaps at Some Point. This is such a great fic. I love it so much. And I'm sorry about that French bit. I couldn't pronounce any of those words in French. I don't speak that. I'm sorry, guys. All the French listeners out there. Anyways, if you'd like to hear more My Hero Academia podfics, or you have different fandoms you'd like me to focus on, then just let me know down below, and I'll look into that. Patch out!